joining us for our session on perceptions of consulting in the GCC. This is a presentation that was originally given in Dubai a couple of weeks ago. So if you were there and don't have much time today, you might not want to listen to it again. But if you haven't, I hope it will be helpful. It's taken from our new piece of research, our client perception program, which is a piece of research that's divided up by geography. We recognise that it's really important when understanding clients' perceptions of consulting firms to see how they change from one place to the next, not least because, as one person so eloquently put it to us some time ago, they said there's more difference between McKinsey's New York and London offices than there is between the whole of McKinsey and Bain. It's a reminder that opinions do vary, and indeed firms do vary quite significantly from one place to the next. So this is all about the GCC. And if you're of a tweeting disposition, then you can use the hashtag GCC Perception. I'm sure one of my colleagues will be tweeting using that hashtag during this session. We will try to leave a little space at the end for questions, but to be absolutely honest, that rarely works because I sort of waffle on for too long. So forgive me if that doesn't happen. Please get in touch with us afterwards if there isn't time for it and ask any questions that way. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So just wanted to kind of set this in context for those of you who might not be totally familiar with our research. That now has kind of four major parts to it. Growth strategy, in which we find our strategic planning program and a whole load of custom research and consulting work. Consulting market trends, which is where you would find our geographical-based consulting market report. Indeed, that's where you'd find our report on the GCC consulting market. Content strategy, which is where you find most of our thought leadership-related research. And then this client feedback piece, which is where you find the new client perception program. So you are here right now. You're in the GCC part of that. And as you can see, beyond that, we do a lot of custom research and consulting projects in this kind of client feedback discipline, or the client feedback quadrant of our business. So sets the context a little bit. So this particular type of research, what were we doing? Well, we were asking two questions. Firstly, what the clients think about consulting firms, and secondly, why do they think what they think? A question turns out, answers to which turn out to be particularly interesting. It's really important, I think, to hear that we only ever asked people to talk about individual firms. So a lot of what I'm going to show you today is effectively an aggregate view, but clients themselves were never asked to provide that aggregate view. They were never asked about what they thought about the industry as a whole. They were never asked about what they thought of a type of firm. They only ever provided answers about individual firms. We've done the aggregating to draw out some interesting stories from it. So what do they think, and why do they think what they think? Those are the important questions we're trying to answer. Who did we ask? Well, we spoke to 130 people across the region, and each of them answered questions about 3 firms from a list of 20, which contained, frankly, all of the normal names that you know and love. We also provided them with an opportunity to talk about firms that weren't on that list, although unsurprisingly there weren't sufficient responses for any of those smaller firms to enable us to talk about them with any statistical validity. So this is in effect focused on big global consulting firms that are present in the region. 46% of the people were in the UAE, 36% in Saudi Arabia, a smaller proportion in Qatar, and very few in Oman. So it was mainly focused on the UAE and Saudi Arabia. These were end users, not procurement people. These are the people that you're actually, your end customer, the people you sell your services to. 30% were presidents, vice presidents, or directors. We understand, particularly in this region, the importance of speaking to the most senior people. Indeed, we were really pushed by our manager of the Middle East, Jody Davis, to make sure that we were getting only the most senior people, because we understand that that's where decisions tend to get made. So nearly a third describing themselves as presidents, vice presidents, or directors, and then a further 62% describing themselves as senior managers. And we happen to know from research of our own that a lot of consulting does get bought at that kind of senior manager level. So a fair representation there. 58% came from organisations with more than 5,000 employees. So we're typically talking about big organisations. There was a 60-40 split between back office and front office functions. So back office, we're talking about things like operations, finance, HR, legal functions. Front office, we're talking about things like marketing, sales, customer service, that kind of thing. So a fairly nice split between those two. And 65% of people were over 40. We haven't done a huge amount of delving around in the data to see in any more detail what that tells us. I think it speaks to some extent now about the seniority of people. But we are interested in the extent to which perceptions shift across age groups. So that's research that we look forward to doing, perhaps through some sort of custom project sometime in the future. So something we have data for but haven't done a huge amount of analysis on. And people were from a range of different sectors, so sectors broadly representative of the GCC consulting market, as you would know and love it. What did we ask them about? Well, we asked them about quality of service. We asked them about characteristics of consulting firms. What are the sort of characteristics that firms exhibit? We asked them, of course, about price, and in doing so, we also asked them about value. And we asked them, most interestingly, I think, about the factors which influence their perceptions. So why do they think what they think? What is it that's forming their opinion of a firm? Which turns out to be really quite an interesting area on a couple of counts. So I'll come on to that towards the end. So those are the things that we asked them about. I'm not going to touch on absolutely everything today, of course. We've got a very short amount of time to do this. So this is just to give you some kind of brief insights into what we're hearing. Let's start with quality and see what they told us about quality. So this is an average across all clients talking about all consulting services. So it is an average view. But what it tells us is that 54% of people in the GCC rate the quality of service that they're receiving from consulting firms as high or very high. So really quite a positive start there. I think a really positive signal about the attitude of clients towards consulting firms in the region. There's then 38% who describe quality as average, and a much smaller 8% who describe quality as either poor or very poor. There's a question here, I think, about where we draw the line between what we're happy with and what we're not happy with. It's tempting to group the 54 and 38% together and say, you know, these are the people for whom everything's okay. I would argue against that and say that actually we need to draw the line between the greens and the yellows, if you like. We need to group the average people with those who are less satisfied, because in truth, when it comes to talking about quality, nobody really gets a consultant in to be average, do they? I think they get a consultant in to be exceptional, to be good, to be very good, to be something other than ordinary. So I think we need to be a little cautious about getting too overexcited. There are still more than half of people who are clearly happy to some degree with the quality of service that they're getting, but quite a significant proportion for whom I think there's work to be done. To some extent that changes from one type of firm to the next. So we see people particularly satisfied where quality is concerned with technology firms. 60% of people there describing quality as high or very high. Similar number for strategy firms. Slightly fewer for HR firms and fewer again for the Big Four. Not massive differences in truth. Big Four notably slightly fewer than half. But there are subtle differences from one firm type to the next. What about price and value? Well, again, overall, not quite such a positive situation here. About a third of people telling us that they thought that that the value that they got was more than what they paid in fees. So price and value, as you'll understand, is quite a tricky thing to talk about with clients. We do it in quite a simple way. We ask them what they think they got in value in relation to the fees they paid. So was it in line with the fees they paid? Was it more than the fees they paid? How much more? Was it twice, 5 times, 10 times the fees they paid? Or was it less? Was it twice, 5 times, or 10 times less than the fees that they paid? So 33% on the positive side. 33% are saying they think they got back more than they paid. 53%, a really big slug of people, saying that they thought that value was pretty much in line with the fees they paid, and 14% saying they thought it was below the fees they paid. They got back less than they paid for. Again, I think we need to be a little cautious about where we put that 53%. I would argue that simply getting back what you paid for is probably not going to be keeping people terribly happy. We need them in that green camp at the top. We need them thinking they got more than they paid. And indeed, of course, many clients are increasingly insisting on measuring what they get and on making sure there is a return. So I think some work to be done here. I don't want to overegg this bit because, frankly, clients are often pretty critical about price at least. But I think it is notable that we are talking about it in relation to value here. So it's a little bit more of a meaningful way to think about price. So some work to be done, I think. Once again, when we look at the proportion of people who said that they got more in value than they paid in price, subtle differences from one firm to the type of firm to the next. Not massive differences except for the case of HR firms. So most positive here is strategy firms seem to be, clients of strategy firms seem to be most likely to say that they're getting more in value than they paid in fees, which is no small achievement given that many strategy firms traditionally charge quite high fees in the first place. Big Four, again, not bad at all there, over a third of people talking about getting more than they paid in fees, and technology firms very close by. There is a problem here, I think, with HR firms. Clearly, far fewer people talking about realising value in projects there. I think, to be honest, this speaks to some extent to the fact that it's quite hard to measure HR projects, which doesn't really kind of let HR firms off the hook. I think what seems to be important for HR firms is that they recognise this issue and find ways to deliver services that have a greater tangible value, or at least to measure the services that they currently deliver. So I think a challenge there. But apart from those, again, things not any massive differences from one type of firm to the next. What about characteristics? Well, to be honest here, again, we didn't see massive differences. So unsurprisingly, strategy firms are likely to be thought of as best for strategy. Technology firms are likely to be thought of as best for technology. And so it goes. But there were some areas in which they were subtly different. So strategy firms stood out particularly for the extent to which they were seen to be able to influence internally, to really engage and influence the internal stakeholders that needed influencing. So particularly strong there. Technology firms do best where chemistry is concerned. I don't mean here their ability to put things in test tubes. I'm talking here about their ability to fit in culturally with a client, to build some kind of chemistry, personal chemistry with a client. Something that we know is massively important in consulting wherever you are, but particularly important, I think, in the GCC, particularly where at the moment there's such demand for people to be working, for consultants to be working in implementation, an area that really requires this kind of cultural fit. So technology firms thought to be particularly strong there. The Big Four firms were most likely to be described as average, and it was an issue that seems to blight them. Well, I don't know if blight is quite the right word, but certainly a pretty common theme in terms of people's opinions about Big Four firms right across the region. Very likely to be seen as average for everything, which brings some challenges with it. HR firms tend to be seen best in terms of their willingness to challenge, or to put it another way, to be honest, to not just tell the client what they think they want to hear, but to really kind of give them the truth. So there were some subtle differences in terms of how people thought about different types of firms in relation to characteristics. But in truth, again, no massive differences. If you're looking for the really big differences, this is where you find them. You find them in the difference between the opinions of indirect clients and direct clients. Let me explain who those are. Indirect clients are people that feel qualified to talk about your firm in some way. They may have worked with you in the past. They may even have worked for you. You may have worked for their organisation but not directly for them. They have enough of an opinion about you. They have enough experience or exposure to you to feel qualified to speak about you, but they're not actively working with you now or haven't been doing so in the very recent past. Those are direct clients, the people that are either actively working with you now or have done so in the very recent past. So if you like, this is the kind of the difference between, you might think this is the difference between clients and prospects. And it turns out to be one of the most meaningful differences in terms of the opinion of clients. So it explains, I think, to some extent, how expectations measure up against reality. So what we see, for example, is in a difference in how likely direct and indirect clients are to rate quality of consulting services as high. So we see indirect clients having this expectation that very few consulting firms will have low or very low quality services, that many will be average, but that an even larger number will be high quality, and quite a significant proportion will be very high quality. So there's quite a positive view about what consulting firms are likely to be able to do. There's quite a positive expectation, if you like, in the market, because this difference between indirect and direct is a very useful proxy for the views of people in terms of expectation versus reality. Direct clients tend to see things slightly differently, so they're more likely to say that quality is very low, quite a bit more likely to say it's low, slightly less likely to say it's average, and indeed to say that it's either high or very high. So expectations are being set quite high, but they're not being quite matched in reality. So in reality, these direct clients, these people who are actually working with you, are likely to be feeling a little bit disappointed. And of course, this relationship between expectations and reality is a slightly awkward one, because you can kind of set yourself up to fail here. If expectations are set too highly in the first place, then it's almost inevitable that the only way will be down. But I think, nevertheless, expectations are critical, aren't they? And I think we all want to be kind of exceeding them in some way. And I think the fact that in the GCC things are going just slightly the wrong way at the moment is a cause for some concern. Some types of firms seem to disappoint more than others. So we're talking here about the proportion of people who are in the case of each firm type, who are more likely, of direct clients who are more likely to be disappointed than, or to have a low expectation of quality than indirect clients. So we see this uplift in strategy firms, or perhaps we should really call it a downlift, but 25% more direct clients talk about the quality of strategy firms being low or very low than do indirect clients. In other words, there's quite a big mismatch here between expectation and reality. People are being quite disappointed. HR firms, quite similar. High expectations, more people in reality talking about being disappointed. Technology firms, slightly less so, and only an 11% uplift there in the number of people who talk about quality being low. And here's where the big four firms start to benefit. So although they tend to be most likely to be described as average in all sorts of areas, price, value, characteristics, and quality, actually the experience that people are having of working with big four firms seems to be quite pleasant. Actually they're managing to exceed expectations. Now, of course, there are any number of ways to look at this. We can say, well, you start from a low expectation, therefore it's pretty easy to exceed it, and that's very much true. Nevertheless, we still have in the market a situation where big four firms' clients are likely to be quite pleasantly surprised, and I think that's going to be working to their favour. To a very large extent, of course, what I'm talking about here is the relationship between, if you like, marketing and delivery. We're talking about the marketing of strategy firms, for example, being very strong, creating this really strong expectation and then not quite being met in reality. We're talking, if you like, by the same token, about a bit of a problem with big four firms' marketing. Okay, you could say, well, it's doing a good job and it's not oversetting expectations. But really, why is it that big four firms' clients are so pleased in reality when they become a direct client? Why are they so much pleased, happier than they thought they were going to be where quality is concerned? So talks a lot, I think, to the relationship between marketing and delivery. I've taken the firm names out of this. You won't be surprised to hear, because I don't want to spend today picking on anyone in particular. What we see when we look at this relationship between indirect and direct clients where quality is concerned is three distinct groups of firms emerging. There are those like Firm A at the top who seem to exceed expectations, in some cases quite significantly so, no matter where those expectations were set in the first place. I'd say firm A does look particularly strong here because expectations started off quite high and end up being really significantly exceeded. So there are those that are kind of exceeding expectations, for whom direct clients are more likely to talk about quality being high than our indirect clients. And the rating down the left-hand axis is just the average scores that they were giving. Then we have this tranche of clients for whom expectations are pretty much or tranche of firms, sorry, for whom expectations are pretty much in line with reality. Maybe up slightly, maybe down slightly, but not significant. You'll notice that they're also quite likely to be the ones sort of that start in the middle and finish in the middle. There aren't very many that start with expectations being very low and end up with experience being very low or similarly very high. So quite a kind of middle of the road view. And then there are these firms for whom expectations start off much higher than they end up. These are the disappointed clients, if you like. There's some quite striking ones here. I mean, look there at firms L and K, for example. Firm L particularly. Expectations start off as high as they are for anybody else, but finish off kind of right down in the gutter when it comes to direct clients. So we see things really changing between indirect and direct clients. I think that's a really important dimension of the findings of this research. But why do people think what they think? Now this turns out to be really interesting. And again, I've shown the difference here between direct clients and indirect clients. What is it that's influencing people's perceptions? These are all the things that the proportion of people that say things have a significant impact on their perception of a consulting firm. And this is across all consulting firms, so it's an average. Overall, I think we have to point to this one out on the right-hand side about results. Both indirect and direct clients speak about the influence of results on their perception of a consulting firm. Perhaps not entirely surprising, but results really matter. I think it's notable there that there's the same proportion of indirect and direct clients saying that results matter. So even for those people that you're not actually working for, indirect clients are going to look to the results that you've delivered elsewhere. So not entirely surprising, but really important to reiterate, results matter. Away from that, I think things get quite interesting. We have reports and presentations, for example. So this is kind of the work that you deliver in the course of a consulting project. And it's as important to direct clients as the results that you deliver in terms of forming their perception of your firm. Let's be really clear that that's what this is about. It's about how their opinion gets formed. But it's also quite important amongst indirect clients. So we've got 38% of indirect clients here saying reports and presentations are important. And although that's quite a way behind direct clients, I do think it speaks to the need to understand that the material you deliver in the course of a consulting project ends up with a wider audience than simply your direct client. It ends up finding its way throughout an organization and can have quite a significant impact on people's opinions about your firm. So think about the secondary audience for the sort of material that you deliver in the course of a consulting project. Unsurprisingly, for indirect clients, overall reputation seems to matter more than anything else. It's that kind of that reputational element that goes the furthest to forming their opinions of your firm, and it matters too for direct clients. Thought leadership is important. I'm struck by the extent to which it's more important for indirect clients than it is for direct clients. You might say that stands to reason. I think that's frankly a sign that thought leadership is doing its job quite well here. And although it's a little lower than other factors, remember that these are the most influential factors. Quality of people. Before we move on, we really can't ignore the influence of the quality of people, particularly for direct clients. But be aware that there are a substantial proportion of indirect clients who are saying they're having their opinions formed based on the quality of your people, based on their perception of the quality of your people. So your people are mattering, if you like, even before people have met them, or certainly have met them through the course of a consulting project. So different things and different extents to which these things influence people's perceptions of the firm. Before we finish, I just want to show you how that can look different from one individual firm to the next. Now I'm going to pick on a couple of firms here because this is not actually talking about quality. This is simply talking about what influences perceptions of a particular firm. So when we talk about EY, for example, we can see here that results really matter for EY. 44% of clients talking about that having significant influence on their perception of EY. Amongst indirect clients, well, 32% of people saying that quality of people has the biggest influence there. I'm not too worried here about the differences from one factor to the next. What I'm interested in is this. I'm interested in the fact that when we ask clients about BCG, far more people talk about far more things having a much bigger influence. So they're just open to influence a lot more. There's a lot more that goes towards forming their opinion of BCG than there is towards EY. That tells me something about the extent to which minds are made up. So once again, none of this is speaking about quality itself. This isn't saying BCG good, EY bad. It's simply saying the opinion that people have about EY and BCG these are the things that can influence that. And what we see is effectively people saying, we've made our minds up about EY. We're not as easily influenced when it comes to EY as we are when it comes to BCG. Now, of course, if perceptions are already quite strong about EY, that's not a problem. But I suspect that most firms, and so certainly most marketeers, would like to feel they have levers at their disposal to change opinions. And that's what BCG very clearly appears to have here. It has these levers, it has things it can do that will shift perceptions of its firm in a way that EY is going to struggle to do to a much greater extent. And that plays out across all consulting firms. We have these charts for all consulting firms, all of the world's major consulting firms in our report. So we can start to compare the extent to which people can be influenced and how more specifically they can be influenced when it comes to the way clients see them. So that, I hope, is a useful introduction to this. There's, of course, a lot more detail in the report itself. If you'd like to find out more about the report or just have any questions, please contact Jodie Davis. She's your first port of call in the GCC, and her details are there. But, of course, if you'd like to contact me, I'd be delighted to hear from you with any questions. You can find my details on our website, and I'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.